The reality is people to this day still don't even know where Portugal is on the map. They think it's part of Spain. So we have to overcome obstacles like that. That's the first thing. So when you're marketing Portugal, I think it starts with really just telling the story of Portugal as a country, identifying where it is, the history behind it, because Portugal does have so much history within winemaking and obviously outside of winemaking.
The conversation that we are dealing right now today is meeting the leading Portugal winemakers. And the main conversation that we are excited and looking forward to talk more about is how to sell Portugal wines in the US. I would start with Chris. So why don't you give a little bit of introduction of yourself, and then we move to Tiago.
So my name is Chris Saraiva. I'm the co-founder of Brands of Portugal. Brands of Portugal is a company founded by myself and my wife in 2021. While the company itself has only been around for a few years, I've personally been around Portuguese wine most of my life. My father and my grandfather founded a company about 38 years ago, also importing Portuguese wines. My wife and I took a little bit of a different approach when we co-founded Brands of Portugal, in the sense that we found that the market was still missing a bit of the story aspect of Portugal and selling more of the small productions, the family-owned projects. So that's what we did, and that's what when we founded Brands of Portugal, was really with showcasing those family projects, those smaller productions, and telling their story throughout the US.
Before I move to Tiago, let me just give a brief to audience as well. So Chris is one of our regional and category ambassador for Portugal as well. What we are planning with Sommelier Choice Award is to really go deeper with the regions to understand how exactly the winemakers are, to get more insights, to educate consumer. I think education is the prime objective that we have for us, and kind of bridging the gap between the regions and the places that they would like to grow, be it US or UK. With Sommelier Choice Award, I'm sure that US is the big market and US is the market that we are talking about. And that is what we are trying to do with our webinars as well. So over to you, Tiago, if you can just help us quickly with your introduction and also story of Master of Wine. I guess that's the exam that you're preparing for.
Yes, well, so good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are listening to us. I'm speaking from Portugal. I am a Portuguese winemaker. I started working back in 2007, and then up to 2017, I worked for bigger companies. And then in 2017, I started my own path as a consultant winemaker and winemaker by myself. So in that picture, actually, it's a good picture because the picture was taken in the Dow, which is center north of Portugal. But I also work in Adega Amarel, which is the company that I accompany in Alentejo. So I work a bit across the country in smaller projects such as what Chris described. And so that gives me time and experience within the full country, like Alentejo, Down, Douro as well. In parallel, I am a stage 3 candidate of the Institute of Masters of Wine, which means I passed the exam, and at the moment I'm working on my research paper. And that also gave me a broader view of the wine world, not just the Portuguese section, but the entire world.
Amazing. So welcome, Tiago. We have interacted with Chris before, so I am sure that this will be a fantastic opportunity to get your insights as well. The first question to you is, how do I identify the right US distributor for my wine portfolio, and what factors should I prioritize? I think this was one of the basic questions that most of the wine brands and wineries were having. So please share your insights.
And this is a question that even we get a lot from our side. And I really feel strongly that you have to first identify one of two things. Do I want to take the approach of a single importer to represent my brand throughout the United States? Or do I want to take the approach of having multiple importers in different states throughout the United States? And that question and the answer to that question is really dependent, I think, personally, based upon your own production as a producer and the capacity that you're able to take on as a producer. I think that has a big impact on that. And again, this is obviously all my opinions. This is not that fact, but my opinion is, if you're a small producer, you typically want to go with one importer. I think one importer gives you a few advantages that multiple importers don't when it comes to being a smaller boutique producer. One of those advantages is certainly controlling your market strategy and controlling your pricing across the states of the United States, the 50 states of the United States. When it comes to having a similar market strategy and being able to work with partner distributors using only one importer, the messaging stays consistent across the board, your pricing stays aligned, and we don't have, in a world where obviously we have technology available to us where anyone can just pop online and do a Google search of a specific product, we're not having wines that are $3 and $4 different from state to state. And I think that's very important when you're considering brand growth. The other thing, when obviously you get into these larger producers and producers that have the capacity to do hundreds and hundreds of thousands or millions of bottles of wine, maybe that's not as important to you because you really need to be more aggressive and price driven and have more of an aggressive approach that smaller producers are not necessarily worried about because they only have a limited production to spread out through these 50 states. So in that case, maybe there is an advantage to going with multiple importers in different sizes. Obviously, we understand the United States is a very large country. There's no doubting that. And so, and again, in the scenario where you have a lot of production and you really need to move through that, and maybe you're not, and I hate to say this, but maybe you're not as worried about the hand sell or the storytelling of your product. You really just need to get the juice out and move the volume. Then again, that's where having multiple importers might work to your advantage. The other side of it is the compliance side, and that becomes a little bit tricky. So when you have, if you're a boutique producer and you have one importer, they're going to work with you on the import state and working through compliance and regulations through the import state. And then they'll work with their partners in different states, the distributed partners, to make sure that each individual state is falling within compliance when you start selling in those states. When you as a producer start working with individual importers in different states, you're really responsible for those compliance tasks. And that can get not only complicated, but it can get very expensive. And the goal here is obviously not to make a mistake as a producer, to put yourself in a position where you can't reverse from that. Obviously, we know about franchise laws and how different states get complicated with that. If you are, as a producer, are making a decision to go with multiple importers and you put yourself into a franchise state, just know that it's not an easily reversible thing that you have just locked yourself into. So that's where I think, again, pros and cons, not saying one way is better than the other. I just personally feel boutique producer, go with one importer, let them really work with your brand throughout the country. If you're a larger producer, I think both come into play, but I think maybe at that point, I could understand where multiple importers might make sense for you.
So just one question, which just an extension of it. So, for example, if I'm a winery from Portugal and if I want to see what portfolio of an importer or a distributor I fit in, how do I see it? Should I work with an importer or distributor who already has an experience of selling Portugal wine, or should I go where there is a demand and there's a need of in supply and somebody who is looking for? So, what is an ideal way? Should I go with the experienced one, or should I see where there's a gap in the portfolio and I fit right there?
Again, I think this goes back to the pros and cons of there's advantages and disadvantages to both. This is going to bring me, and we're going to discuss this a little bit more as we go along, but this always goes back to perception. So the question is almost answered with another question, which is, what are they currently, if they are representing Portugal, what are they currently representing? And is it in a kind of a stigma of what Portugal might be already known for in the United States, which is always that kind of value driver, right? So it's Portugal, if it has any type of reputation, it's mostly on the value driven side. So be cautious not to put yourself with an importer that has solely focused on the category of, sub $15, sub $10 category, because then you can box yourself in. If you're going to go to someone that doesn't have anything of Portugal, I understand how that can be a little scary because you might think, oh, well, they're not representing anything Portugal, but not necessarily a bad thing because you're introducing them to first a country that obviously we know that the quality exists, and they might be eager and excited to represent Portugal and might be doing it in a totally different approach that has maybe worked for a different country that they represent. And now they're going to take that same approach and apply it to Portugal, which I think could be an advantage.
The big question. Why Portugal and why now?
It is, even that it is written with 4 words, it's a big question because Portugal now, because the country has a long track record of winemaking and wine trading. And of course, I just double checked a few data. And at the moment, Portugal is the 8th global player and the 9th in value. So the 8th in volume in worldwide business. And regarding the US, is the second most important destination for wine, or for the Portuguese wine that is sold abroad. So Portugal and the category, the market US is a big thing and very important. But going back to the previous question to Chris, that question extension is, who within the US are a producer from Portugal looking for? Because once again, it's all about the size and about what people are doing. Because if you are trying to fight the fight of the value, as Chris said, that will be a very unfair fight, and most likely we will lose because we don't have the scale to build up to such a volume and to such prices and to such. So it's better to search for, even that is somebody or some wine importing company that does not work with Portuguese wine, but they do have the eager clients, the adventurous clients, some people that are available to taste and to feel something different. And that's where the biggest value of Portugal can lay, because still a part of the business and a significant part of the business is done with port, which is a worldwide style known and produced in the country. And that can be the gate to enter a market, because it's something that is easy to remember, and it's a style that is eventually more or less known. So Portugal has a lot to still do and to keep on growing, because it has a lot of grapes. That can be a challenge at the same time, because they are somehow hard to pronounce. So a lot of work can be done, but still I believe on the bright side of things, there are plenty of opportunities. And so now and the future, the category can keep on growing.
Sure. What we have been hearing recently, and Chris just has been like in our feedback that we are getting from a lot of people, and especially from buyers, is that consumers nowadays they are looking for the regions who were well developed and had a lot of category and versatility. But now there is a huge demand for people to taste new regions, people to go with more storytelling, more understanding, and there's a sort of a bridge that they are crossing and looking for something which comes from smaller regions. So I think authenticity is one thing, stories of the regions is second thing, the differentiation in the taste is third. So I think that is what we are seeing, and I'm sure that with all the data and the numbers, there's a huge opportunity for Portugal. Tiago.
And also, it's easy to trace a parallel within other regions or with other grape or wine styles. Like, for instance, who like a paler red can find plenty of juicy reds from Portugal with different grape varieties, which contribute to add something new that my competitor doesn't have. And so I can stand out of the competition because I have a style that is well understood, even that the region is not known, but the style of the wine, which is can work for any wine, it's a differentiation that can help in the competition.
And I think that speaks to a little bit as well of people, and I think maybe a younger generation that's now coming into or has just for a short amount of time been in the wine drinking category. I think experiences are a big part of it now, and I think that's why we don't have necessarily this kind of I need to have that California cab or whatever it may be. I think people want to explore different things and want to try different regions, as you mentioned. And I think, again, it goes all just back to trying new experiences, which is a perfect opportunity for a country like Portugal to shine.
Yeah.
Agreed, 100%. I think experiential drinking is something which is just happening a lot. One more important question. So what marketing strategies have proven effective for promoting Portuguese wine? And you can give your any of the success stories also, Chris, if you have in mind, like what has worked better for putting this region out there? What sort of different marketing, or maybe the same conventional marketing but a different message or a different storytelling that has worked?
Yeah, so I think I'll start by saying, so when my wife and I founded Brands of Portugal, we made the decision to call it Brands of Portugal as a company, and made it super clear that we were only going to identify with Portuguese wines and represent Portuguese wines. So we were different in that sense. Not everyone's going to do that and take that chance. Obviously, for us, it's a little bit of a cultural, not a little bit, but it's a cultural connection. It's a historical family connection. So Portugal for us made sense exclusively. Again, not everyone's going to do that. The reality is people to this day still don't even know where Portugal is on the map. They think it's part of Spain. So we have to overcome obstacles
Right.
like that. That's the first thing. So when you're marketing Portugal, I think it starts with really just telling the story of Portugal as a country, identifying where it is, the history behind it, because Portugal does have so much history within winemaking and obviously outside of winemaking. Talking about the families and the family-owned properties that exist, the winemakers that are there, the grapes. Obviously, Tiago mentioned there's 250 plus grape varietals in Portugal. It can be overwhelming, but I always say at some point in history, someone didn't know what Cabernet Sauvignon was, and then it was talked about, and people now, obviously, it becomes a standard amongst other grapes. If we avoid talking about Portuguese grape varietals, no one's ever going to know what they are. So let's talk about the Touriga Nacionals. Let's talk about the Moreto, which obviously Tiago is super familiar with. Like, let's have these names, and yes, they're difficult to pronounce, which is obviously always an obstacle. But we need to say them. We need to say them, and we can't just default to, oh, it's a red blend. We really need to get into the nitty gritty with Portugal and talk about these things. I think that does make a big difference when it comes to the marketing side of it. I think if you just continue to tell the story and really shout out the story, talk about all the aspects of it, get away from just worrying about the value side of it, and really start with the core story of each thing. I think the marketing is built into that. The marketing is really just in the storytelling. That's what's worked for us. People always say, wow, I never knew that about Portugal. I mean, at every tasting, that's what we hear. And we're not going super geeky and wine geeky on these terminologies or what we're doing. We're just telling the story as if it's, I mean, for us, it really is like a part of our family. Like, we're telling family stories because it's, again, a culturally driven from us. But anybody can do this. We didn't reinvent the wheel. We just started telling the story that other people do for other regions, and it's worked for us. So if you say to me, what's successful with marketing? Talk about Portugal. There is also the other side of it, which has helped us in this. Everyone's traveling to Portugal right now. I mean, Condé Nast Traveler has called it the destination to travel to. Everyone is going there. So use that to our advantage. I mean, if people are already going there and they're drinking the wines that are there, representing those here, one less obstacle, because people now are coming back and seeing what they drink there, and they're understanding that it can be just as good here as it is there, as long as we're importing the right wines and authentic wines of Portugal and representing the right brands.
Correct. True. So I was about to say that it has becoming one of the travelers' destination. And when that is the scene, you do not only have an option of putting the message to the consumers who are already into wine and regions, but you also get to attract new consumers. And the word of mouth is so good that the internet is basically influential. It's influential in so many ways. One person sharing this story of one particular wine from Portugal is going to reach to millions of people out there. So I think that's a fantastic approach to put your story out there. So Tiago, which grape varieties offer the greatest potential for success in the US? So do you really differentiate it in that way? Would you say that it might? So maybe we want to hear that what has worked domestically but has no chance to work globally, and maybe it could be the other way around.
We can go, as I said before, by the styles, because we do know that we have like a region for big, bold red wines, such as the Douro Valley, which is normally a blend of different varieties, where the variety is less important and the style of the wine is much more. So, of course, allow me this comparison. If who likes an Napa Cab will like a Douro Red. It's easy as that, because are bold, big wines, and you don't need to know what are the 5-6 grapes used normally in that red. You need to know that it is, in style-wise, close to big, bold reds. And the same happens with a lighter or with an oaked, like an oaked Chardonnay or oaked some other variety like Encruzado, which is a variety that we have in the DAO. And there are quite some parallels. Of course, there are differences. But I think the easiest way in is via style. So using the style to explain the grape rather than try to impose the grape, which is a strange name written in a foreign language.
Do you think Portugal regions are complex for people to understand, or do you still find it lesser complex than how we assume Italian regions are? And it could be easy for consumer to get educated on.
Yeah, well, of course, once again, and there is where, depending on who is your client or who is your audience, That depends, because I assume that somebody with WSET level 3 or something like that will know where to locate Bairrada, will know where to locate the DAO. But maybe that is a small niche of the market. I think it is much more important to go for the bigger styles and to understand that we allowed to produce fresher or lighter or complexer reds, and therefore go to the aim of the question and to allow us to get back to the market as quickly as possible.
So question to you again, Tiago. When people talk about Portugal wine, it's always equates to an inexpensive table wine. So do you agree with that? The question one is that. And the second is, where do you think the true value of Portugal is that people should highlight?
I need to agree with that within the most of the bigger markets. The data from Wines of Portugal related to 2022, which were presented last November, says that the average of the wine purchased in Portugal to be sold to the US was purchased here for €4 a bottle. I will ask Chris to help to translate that into what will become the price in the US.
For most bottle, we'll put it on the shelf at about $15 to between $15 to $16 on more or less.
So that's if that's the value, it is a great value, because most of the wine sold in Portugal most likely will be selling below that. So it is an interesting average for the Portuguese market, because if you go outside for a Portuguese supermarket, a big mass appeal place, you will find wines for that price within the market. So if that's the average of the export price, is a great price. Yet we do have better values, or better said, we do have better wines that are retailing for higher prices. But once again, that requires a work of explanation, that requires a work of introduction, of education to the client or to the importer, or to be able, very important in my perspective, to travel to the market and listen to the demands or to the requests of the importer, of the retailer, of the final client. What are they looking for? How can I fill that gap, as you said, and offer something different? And yes, we do have that capacity, because even being a small country, we do have very different regions exposed to different terroir elements, if you allow me this expression, and that allows us to produce different styles, and that normally can build up in price as well, of course, in quality.
I think that's what Tiago just mentioned is a huge part. So if we're obviously speaking to producers now in Portugal and kind of having them understand what it takes, you need to come to the market and understand the US market. It's such a unique market. It's very, very different than what you see in Europe. It's its own thing, even from beyond state to state, even locally, local city to city, town to town. It's so different. And if you don't have an understanding of it, it's very difficult for us, even as importers and distributors, to pass along that information until you see it on the ground. To follow up on what Tiago said, though, I also think it's important to not always, so to take the advice and take the feedback that you're getting from a retailer or a restaurant, but also don't forget that they don't know what they don't know, in the sense of, if they're not familiar with Portugal and they don't know what the capacity is of Portugal, they might only see it as a value country and only give you that feedback. And you might take that as, okay, this is all we need to do to get into the US market. But don't be afraid to show what you're known for. Keep the authenticity, because this happened about 30 years ago a lot in Portugal, which is producers just started focusing on these kind of export-only products, sugar-loaded wines that really had no authenticity to Portugal. And that's where Portugal, I think, lost a little bit of its identity. And I don't want to go back there. And I'm very protective of that. I want to be sure that we're keeping Portugal where it should be, let people, because we hear this often as well, which is, oh, the wines here don't taste like the wines in Portugal. Well, yeah, because you're drinking export-only products that are not even sold in Portugal. So we need to be cautious of that as well. Let's keep the identity of Portugal true to what it is. Let's make sure we're not letting those lines get blurred. But yes, let's find authentic wines from Portugal that can work in the US market. I think that's the key.
I think that's also a part of an answer to the next question, Chris, that how important is storytelling and cultural heritage of Portugal wine in influencing you as buyers and consumers? I think you already answered it, but anything to add, especially for the buyers. So how do you think? So one question that I would like to add is, how do you advise winemakers, the Portugal winemakers, to work with the buyers to understand that what are the challenges?
We're in 2024, and the reality is we're in a world still of social media. We're in a world of people want access to everything, right? That everything becomes accessible in this world, day and age. So I think if you want to connect to people, you need to make yourself accessible and the production accessible. We're in a world where people want to know how things are made. They want to know what the story is behind it. They want to know, obviously, we're very cautious now about organic farming. That's something that's becoming more and more important to people, sustainability. So tell those stories, whether it be, I mean, it's a free platform in social media now. Producers need to get engaged with that. They need to be very transparent in their practices and be able to showcase that. I think that's a huge differentiator from a lot of our producers, is the ones that take the time to tell the story, to showcase what they're doing, are the ones that do have an advantage in our market, because as much as our consumers are following us, or it's multi-tiered, right? So consumers follow the retailers or the restaurants that they go to. Those restaurants and retailers are following us, which is shared content. So you have a daisy chain effect there. And then we're obviously following our producers, so we share their content. So if we start from the top of the producer and they start sharing content that can showcase all of these unique factors that they have, again, going back to organic farming, the family aspect, just continually telling their story, all this gets trickled down. And this costs zero, just a little bit of time. There's no expense here. Your marketing budget, shared organically, is free. So it's important to do that. It's super important to continue to tell your story. And I think that's what's going to influence a US consumer. It's not just about saying, here's a bottle of wine, it's $11, it's a great value. No, tell me how this came about. Tell me from planting to harvesting to the winemaking to how it ended up on my table in the United States. Tell me what that process is. If you want to connect with buyers, give them the access to you, give them access to your productions. Transparency wins in the US for me right now.
Is just to complement what Chris said, is show and tell. Let people know what we are doing, why we are doing it, how is it different from whatever other country in the world, and if we have a curious audience to know it and to follow us and to feed our experience, that's great, because we are building bridges and we are once again engaging with somebody else that didn't consume or didn't know well the Portuguese wine business. So yeah, storytelling is a complement of the quality of the product itself.
Because we are in a competitive world, and the reality is a lot of our winemakers and our producers in Portugal, especially most of them for us are boutique. The budget can't compete against some of these massive wineries that exist, right? So if we have the competitive advantage, has to be the level playing field, I should say, it has to be accessible. And again, social is where we win there, is because that's free with an organic reach. Obviously, it does cost money once you start going against paid ads, but not everyone's doing that. So if we can give them a leg up, and even for us as an import company, that has worked. It's been a free marketing tool that has very much helped us and really separated us in our market, is just continuously building a brand around us as a company and allowing us to become kind of a face for Portugal, which is, I guess, why I'm here today. But this is something that we've really dug in with our producers as well. Is during harvest, I know you're super busy and I know you have 10,000 things on your plate, but you need to record harvest and what you're doing on the ground, because that's what's going to help us sell your product.
Correct. So I was coming to the point that there should not be any excuse of you being less in number or you not getting time, because I think you have to be out there. Marketing, for example, TikTok just removed the ban in August. So I think it has become a huge platform for people to get influenced, people to get to know more about you. I think Instagram algorithms are so work. I think now it's getting a streamline as well. So it's amazing for you to do your marketing. So I think the excuse, it's all about, I think, putting your unique selling points out there so that even you reach the market, people know about you. And people actually know that how you are different from other players in the market. So amazing. over to you, Tiago. So during your studies for Master of Wine, you have tasted wines throughout the world. Now, let's assume that you are, in case if you're not from Portugal. So what makes Portugal different from the other regions that you have tasted?
Okay, this is not an easy question because even if facing a blind question, a blind tasting, eventually can be hard to track the Portuguese wine. And is it an advantage or is it a disadvantage? Because we do work, as we already mentioned, with native grapes. Most of them, and if you allow me to trace a parallel with, let's talk first about Italy. You have plenty of native Italian grapes that are neutral to the aroma. And it happens the same here in Portugal. You have native grapes that are neutral or that are citrus-based. And so I think it is the combination of the style and the technique that were used that allows us to get back and to identify it as Portuguese. But yet we do have a lot of work to do to have a glass in a blind tasting and say, that's definitely Portugal. And you can do it, and we can do it in the most well-known styles such as Port or Madeira, which are fortified wines, and they are part of our production. And so they are easy to track because they have a strong and very known style for the alcohol and for the sugar and so on. So for whites, I would go for the fresh and for the notes of citrus, most of them. And then going back to my background, there is also at the moment a niche work done with clay vessels or not just the oak. So it's a mix of different styles. And once again, as much as you know more about what is being done in the world, most likely is being done in Portugal too. So skin contact whites or clay vessel ferments or anything, it can be done here. So I think that what stands us apart is the diversity, the big array of grapes that can be a great opportunity, but also at the same time a great challenge because they are not known.
I think this is another thing that comes up often. We've had this happen in even critic reviews where we send wines out to review, and sometimes they don't necessarily score as well because there might be just a misunderstanding of Talha wines, which is the clay vessel wines that he's referring to. You know, they don't. Even the critics who are just not familiar with Portugal just don't understand what it is, and because of that, and because they're not used to it, they don't necessarily get the ratings that maybe they're worthy of. But again, I say this, and obviously knowing that we don't always get the great scores, we can't lose it though. We can't lose the identity of what Portugal is. That's such a part of its history and such a part of its uniqueness, and it is the differentiator of it. So with time, people will get it, and I think we just have to be patient. Obviously, we need to survive and sell and have a maintaining business, but I think we also can't lose the identity just for the sale now at the risk of losing a long-term true identity of what Portugal is.
Correct. Play on your strengths for a while. I guess that would be the game. And then eventually you can put the entire portfolio down. To Tiago again, how are you adapting your winemaking techniques to cater to the preferences of US consumers? That includes sustainability and ethical winemaking practices.
Well, that's an easy one because those things are getting done, not specifically for the US, but most of them because producers do believe in it. So at the moment in Portugal, there are two sustainability certifications. One that started within a region. So the region itself, which is Alentejo, started its own sustainability program. And it started maybe in 2017, 18, I'm not sure. So it's already at the moment a mature certification. And going back to the whys, why? Because it makes your life easier. It makes you more efficient, and efficiency normally also pays off because you get to spend less money doing something if you can reintroduce whatever that you are sending away. And the same goes to organic farming. Of course, there are regions within the country that for natural conditions, being it for the continental climate or for altitude are very easy to implement organic farming area, like in Beira Interior or in the upper part of the Douro Valley, closer to Spain. And so, but that depends, and that goes to, the wheel keeps on coming us to the same spot, which is if the producer wants to show what they are doing, explain, and via social media or others, and let people know what they are doing, because organic farming is growing. Sustainability at the moment is also a national program, which is more recent than the one that I refer from Alentejo. But a lot of producers are joining in, and of course they are joining for two reasons. First, because once again, as in my vision, is something that helps you to produce better and more efficiently. And secondly, because the market is demanding. So it's a win-win situation, and people are doing that. Yeah.
Are they putting it out in the packaging as well, Tiago? Like, do you put, so for example, we were talking to Sonoma wine growers and they have this sustainability badge on the packaging that makes them, basically differentiates you on the retail shelf. So True. The same thing is going with the Portugal winemakers as well.
Yes, because once again, as I referred to you, there are two sustainability programs, one from Alentejo, and they do have a stamp, because nice. There are different levels up to when you achieve the level of sustainable production for the Alentejo program, and that allows you to use a stamp that says we are sustainable certified by Alentejo. And happens the same more recently for the national certification system but that's more recent. I'm not sure if at the moment in the market there is any producer with a stamp of the Portuguese certification for sustainability, but for the Alentejo they do exist. Yes.
I think to continue on what Tiago said, this is where we need to, as importers and distributors, also do our work in telling these stories and explaining that maybe we have producers that aren't organically certified, but they have organic practices. If it's not on the bottle, that doesn't mean it's not happening. Maybe it's just a cost prohibitive thing. So there are a lot of things that we need to be aware of, and this is where we need to really get behind our partners on the ground in those stores and educate not only the buyer at the store level or the som at the restaurant, but also the actual employees who are doing the day-to-day sales, and tell them, hey, listen, if you have someone who's looking for something that's sustainably farmed, that's organically farmed, but maybe doesn't have this stamp, like, know that these fall into that category. That's our job. And this is, again, why, as Tiago mentioned, why having the visuals to back that up help everyone, right? If you have people who are posting about this, it's going to stay with people, and it's going to be in the back of people's minds when they grab that bottle off the shelf.
So one question to you on this, Chris, is do you get these requirements of, for example, I'm looking for a Portuguese XYZ varietals, which is sustainability focused and organically produced. Do you get these sort of requests from the buyers?
I don't think we've gotten to the point where people are looking specifically for Portuguese sustainable or organically farmed wines. I think we do get, I'm looking for I've had Portugal. I like Portuguese wines. And maybe I'm just trying to be a little bit more, cautious, but I don't think it's gotten to that level of looking for that specifically. I hope to get to that point, because it puts us at an advantage as an importer and what we carry. But I don't think we're there yet. I do think either you're looking for wines that fall into that category and we can introduce you to Portugal. Maybe you haven't had Portugal before, or you're already drinking Portugal and this is just one added benefit. Like you're going to stay within the region that you already know. And now we're going to give you another reason to stay here without having to go anywhere.
Understood. But does it help you with the placements? As you said that
it certainly doesn't work against us. It for sure gives us that one step closer to one additional advantage and one additional selling point. It for sure works with that.
Amazing. Coming to the pricing, so what are the typical pricing structures for imported wines in the US first, and how should I price my wine to remain competitive? I think we discussed on the pricing, but yeah.
So this is. I feel strongly about this. So if I'm a little passionate on this particular topic, it's because
we understand.
So the United States has a couple of different. Obviously, it's a 3-tier system. It has a lot of variables in the way of having inconsistent pricing, and the inconsistent pricing can happen very often in the market. So This is why I am a little biased towards single importer mentalities and formats. And that's because it allows more controlled pricing, as I had discussed before, in the market across all states. So the reality is, and the way we work at Brands of Portugal, so we are importer into Rhode Island and also self-distributing in Rhode Island. And then we have partner distributors in different states throughout the United States. So we do, in our own state, double margin. That's, for me, the proper way of doing business. Not everyone does this, but we do double margin in our own state, meaning we take our importer margin for bringing the product into the United States, and then we add on an additional margin when we self-distribute in Rhode Island. So there's two tiers of margins there. When we work with our partners in different states, and when we're essentially selling to them in different states, we just take our importer margin and then sell to them. Obviously, no distributor margin because we're not distributing. What this does is this allows price consistency across the board. The only additional cost that they have that would essentially have any skew in pricing would be the transportation from our warehouse to them. Beyond that, our pricing should be pretty aligned across the entire United States. What does this do? This, again, avoids market confusion. It avoids consumers going online and searching for pricing and having a variety of pricing that they're seeing online of $2 and $3. We are already going to work against retailers who some might work more aggressively on margins. Some might be more of those hand sell stores that take a little bit more of a margin. So we already have that working against us. When we have importers that are not taking that double margin for import and distribution, then I understand that it does bring up the costs a little bit, but it does protect the brand and it does allow for the brand to again, be consistent across, and I'm repeating myself here, but be consistent across the entire United States without having people asking questions. This also impacts, which people don't necessarily always think about, even critic ratings. So how often we have critic ratings that will post pricing. Okay, this wine got a 91 point rating, Best Buy, and it's $18 on the shelf. And then you go look at some other states and you see it for 23, 24, 25. The retailer is the one that ends up looking bad in this scenario. And again, this all happens because the importer that submitted the wines just submitted pricing based upon their own market, not thinking of the national market. So that's very tricky and something that I think works against brands. So taking all this into consideration and how the pricing structure works, in my opinion on pricing structure, you have typically exports out of Portugal. We're adding in all of our transportation costs, of course, landed costs into the United States. And then we're personally taking in our import margin into our state, working with distributors with only the import margin, working with our own clients on the trade side, on the retail and restaurant side with an additional margin for distribution. This makes everything nice and consistent across the board.
Just a quick question, guess and no sort of. So do you think that most of the importers works in the same way, like ideally on the double margins, or do you still think that the majority of them are working on the
So if you're an importer that has no intent on selling to other states, if you're an importer completely content with just representing your own state, you're more than likely not taking a second margin on it. You want to be more competitive. You want to be more aggressive. You're really just thinking about your own state and you want to get the product out there. So we have seen, and this is why we've kind of positioned ourselves where we really don't want to represent any brands that are already represented in other states or have intentions of going with multiple importers. We've kind of really only worked with brands or have put ourselves in a position of only
exclusivity.
We have exclusive, exactly. Because of avoiding that. Again, it's not any bad intention on the importer that's not working in other states. They don't have a necessity to take on a second margin because they're doing their own thing in their own state. But our business model is not that. Our business model is to have national representation with partners, and we don't want to put our partners in bad light by undercutting them in our own market. I always say it's really like a producer is fighting against themselves in the end because they have their product in different states working against ourselves. And then we have states that can ship direct to consumer. We here in Rhode Island and neighboring Massachusetts can't ship to consumers. So if you have a state like California, who you have an importer that's only taking on that short margin, it might actually be more cost effective for them for a consumer to buy totally across the country than it is for them to buy in their own backyard. That doesn't help the local market.
The next question is to you as well. What logistical challenges they might face in shipping their wine to US, and any sort of risk that you can
I'm already laughing about this because this topic has caused me to drink as much wine as I sell. Logistics have been for the past 3 years an absolute nightmare, including just this past month where we had the East Coast of the United States, the ports pretty much all on strike and shut down, which is not a week-long problem, but more is going to be a multi-month problem because of backlogs and delays during O&D, our business time of year. So logistics is a headache. That's the reality. Specifically, when I'm talking about Portugal, which is obviously the topic that we're talking about here, we have multiple layers of things that come into play. We have obviously containers coming out of Portugal. I'll speak directly for Boston, New York. So Boston, New York, we do have an advantage on the East Coast of having direct ship containers now, a straight line, which we haven't had until a couple of years ago. That started happening, where you basically have containers going on a direct route from Singe in Portugal to Boston or New York with a transit on average of about 2 weeks. Fantastic. When it all works perfectly, it's fantastic. Has it worked perfectly? No. Some things that have happened in the Red Sea have caused delays. Weather has caused delays. We've had containers be delayed because people on the ship have had COVID and it couldn't dock. This happened in the 21 years. So many things happen logistically that we as importers don't have control over. And me with my personality, that drives me absolutely insane because whatever I have control over, I can work with. If I have a container that's sitting in Portugal that doesn't get picked up because Portugal isn't necessarily a major worldwide port, and a container is just sitting there week after week, not getting picked up, that's costing us money because obviously these invoices become due. That's causing us headaches because we have wines listed on restaurant menus and running out of stock.
Right.
It can be a big headache. So what can we do to avoid this? Obviously, the easy answer is order early and order often and order large quantities, but not every importer is going to be able to do that with capital. We don't have that capital to just having sit out there. We also can't ask, especially boutique wineries, to just be sitting there not receiving funds from their side or asking them for terms that are outside of their capacity. We've been fortunate enough to have producers that are super understanding and have worked with us when we have had these container delays, but it's really not fair on anyone's fault but these are things that we have encountered that are big headaches. So obviously big rant. I feel very, very strongly about this, but it is things that we do encounter.
Right.
What is the solution to this? Not a solution, but maybe the best practices, things that you can do to mitigate risk.
Yeah.
So have someone on the ground in Portugal, a freight forwarder that you trust, that is really doing the work for you to be sure you're getting on the soonest container ship, that is making sure that these containers are consolidated accurately and efficiently and are not costing you an arm and a leg, that's looking out for you and watching these costs. I mean, I literally just sent an email yesterday to my freight forwarder who said, you can send out a container today, or if you wait 2 weeks, there's going to be probably a substantial price drop. So if you can hold, and we're going to see things start to normalize. These are the types of people that you need working on the ground for you and looking out for you, because all these things translates to savings in your cost of goods, which will change market and shelf pricing there. Then on the broker side, because obviously this goes into tariffs and taxes, you need to have a broker who has experience with importing wines, because importing wines is not like importing any other goods beyond regulations. You have programs like the CBMA, which is the Craft Beverage Modernization Act, which is going to save you a ton on taxes and tariffs. But you need to have someone who is well-versed in how that program works, how to enter those entries accurately to be able to get those tax savings, again, so it translates to shelf price savings, which will help you and give you a competitive advantage. If you have everything working against you, kind of like we did in 2020 and 2021, it can be really tricky to not only price products, but to keep prices consistent across vintages. That's a big factor. We really, as a company, have tried extremely hard to not have mid-vintage price changes. If we're bringing in product, no one, not a distributor, not restaurants, not retailers, are very understanding if you have a mid-vintage price increase. Everyone hates it. And when you have things like strikes at piers and increasing costs, you as an importer sometimes have to bite the bullet and just take it, knowing that you're in it for the long run, and you might have to take a little bit of a loss or maybe not as much of a margin in order to keep prices consistent.
Right.
We have been able to take minimal increases on vintage changes, and sometimes you have to literally just build in a little bit of a buffer for things like this. And this is not even going into the factor. Obviously, we're talking about logistics, tariffs, and taxes. We also have to talk about the exchange rate. In a market where we're not considering that, you also have to take into consideration what the dollar is doing against the euro when you're purchasing.
Correct.
Sometimes it might be, if you have the capital and the advantage of buying a forward with your exchange company, you might want to get yourself the protections of at a competitive advantage when you're essentially buying a forward or buying euros to be able to pay these invoices and have consistent pricing. We have kind of played the lottery or played the lottery essentially with the euro, and sometimes it's worked for us, sometimes it's worked against us. I think in the end it's been a wash for us. But yeah, these are all things that have to be considered when it comes to purchasing from Portugal.
Amazing, great tips. One last question to you, Tiago. Where do you see Portugal in 5 years in the wine world?
Hopefully, keeping the tide as it is, like growing in knowledge, in recognition, getting a stable for the good products that already has on market, like even that, knowing that the fortifieds are in fall, but at the same time the special categories of oldest tonies and dated vintages are growing, so the premiumization. Knowing that we are in a world market that is shrinking in terms of the volume that's being consumed, and also looking into the production side, hopefully, and that already happens at the moment with professionals that are paying attention to the market and knowing that we are not crystallized. We need to adapt, keeping, as Chris said, our identity, but also knowing that, and once again, paying attention to all of that big array of grapes. There are grapes better suited to produce wines eventually with lower alcohol content, which is in a way a trend that is going on within the world market. So I hope that my colleagues and myself, all of the value chain is paying attention to the market and growing as a whole, and to be easier to pronounce Portuguese grape in whatever part of the world. That means that the grape is at the moment, or will be in 5 years, better known. Hopefully that's the road that we will all lead to.
We're certainly doing the work to get there, and don't be afraid of the AO when you see it on a label. It's own, and it's okay to say.
I have one question for you, Chris, which I wanted to ask you. And so we know that where you come from, what sort of legacy do you have, and how much passionate you are for Portugal wine. But if I have to ask you this question, that how Chris selects the brands that he wants to work, what is your checklist? What do you look for?
Long answer here, but I'll try to make it as short as possible.
Yeah.
Multi-layered. So from us, when we started, we were really trying to represent all of Portugal. That was a key for us. Represent the regions that, obviously Tiago talked about big bold reds in the Douro, but for us it was much more. It was about representing regions like Algarve, which is lesser known. It was the Azores, which obviously now is starting to get a big trend behind it, but really was, when we started, was not a very popular thing, that style of wine that people were looking for. So that was kind of tier one, was representing all of Portugal. Then it was always about representing authentic brands. Again, we're going back to that authentic word, but authentic brands represented by authentic people. So we really wanted to represent the family projects. That was big for us, the small productions. I mean, our company is run by myself and my wife. We founded the company. It's a family project, and it was about representing those smaller, lesser known brands here in the US. So let's look for those people. We actually had a funny rule, which was, if we went to a producer and met with anybody, a lot of these initial meetings were done via Zoom, but if they used the line, "My wine is the best in Portugal," we automatically dismissed them. And it just, like, I don't know, it was an ego thing that we couldn't get past. I mean, how can you say that? I mean, have you tried every single wine in Portugal? Do you truly believe that? I get the passion behind it, but if that was what you were coming to the table with, we just didn't want to do business with you. So that was kind of stage 2 of elimination. And it was just continually filtering these things. So who were the people behind the project? What were the wines? I mean, a lot of the producers that we work with are really using indigenous grapes, or as Tiago said, some of the producers are kind of doing that hybrid stage where you're having, a Cabernet with a Touriga Nacional, that type of thing. So making sure that we had profiles that were identified throughout the country. And then we took it to the next level, which was subregions. So when we started, we had 5 producers from the Alentejo, and that was all about representing the subregions of the Alentejo as opposed to just the Alentejo, and making sure that we didn't have conflicting brands and conflicting profiles of our product. So it was a lot of different tiers. There was in that as well. I mean, marketing was a big part of it, and I hate to say this because I'm not a label shopper, but consumers are label shoppers often. So the branding was very important as well. Like, did this company have a market presence on social media? That was a factor that came into play as well. These all seem like little things, but collectively, they all make a big difference when you're representing a brand. So it was a lot of different factors. Obviously, I went about everything, not even talking about the juice. The juice had to be there. I mean, the quality of the wine, of course, had to be there. That should be a given. I don't want to dismiss that, but overall, like, there was a lot of different factors that went into it, and we just had to have a connection to the people behind it. Again, not to say that too often, but we really had to have a connection to the people behind it. Yeah. Did we hit it 100%? I'm going to be honest with you. We didn't hit it 100% from when we started. We've made some portfolio shifts. Maybe some people who presented themselves a certain way initially, and we've come to find out they weren't that way. Nothing against them, no feelings, but we've made some portfolio adjustments and shifts. But I think we're in a much better place 3.5, almost 4 years in, and really have an understanding of who we want to be as a company. And I think we've blocked out a lot of the noise of, oh, you can't do this with Portugal, or you can't, Portugal is not going to be the only thing that can get you there. We've blocked out that noise. We've proven the path. And now we just got to keep getting these non-believers to believe.
True. Yep. One last question to both of you. So we said that the audience is going to be the winemakers. So I'm sure that you being an importer, there's a lot of support system that you need from the wineries. So any message for them that how they can support well the importers and distributors, ultimately the buyers? What sort of support programs do you need from them, or what sort of marketing needs that you have where you see a gap and you would just want to pass on this message that, hey, if you are looking forward to come to US, these are the basic things that you should be ready.
Maybe my question to you. Yeah. So I think
both of you. Yeah.
I think the big thing here is don't expect to send your product to the United States and not have to do anything for it to sell. And I probably can't say that in a better way, and I'm not trying to be rude to anybody who believes that mentality, but it doesn't work. We are distributors, we are importers, we have a huge job to do, 100%. But if you're not checking in, if you're not trying to understand this market and not trying to support it in any way you can as a producer, you're probably going to fall short. Maybe some brands have been successful in that, but for me, the most successful brands in our market and our most successful brands are the ones that the producers have picked up the phone, have called us consistently, have checked in with us on WhatsApp and said, what's happening in the market? What can we do to support you? Where are trends going? Have come to the United States if they're able to. And we fully understand we're working with boutique wineries that it's cost prohibitive for them. So we're not expecting that from everybody all the time. But those are the ones, those producers and those owners, winemakers have been the most successful for us. It's showing face even on the ground to our retailers and restaurants that keep it memorable, that have allowed these brands to grow in, I mean, really 3 years is not a long time, 2.5 years is not a long time to grow a brand. It does take a long time. But those for us have been the most successful. So if I could give a piece of advice, it's don't just expect to sell, expect to support, quick check-ins, what's happening on the ground, understanding that, again, as I said before, the United States is 50 different countries, basically. It's 50 states, but it's 50 countries. Each market is totally different. So being aware of that and really doing everything you can to understand this market, I think will give you the best path to success.
I think just to complement what Chris just said, we are dealing with an emotional product, still is, and especially on this business that Chris and Nelly have, and where a lot of producers are present. As Chris said, small niche wineries, and so there is a Portuguese saying that goes like, so, "Who is not seen is not remembered." And so you have to be present. You have to go and once again to back to that show and tell, because we are dealing with a category that is not well known. And then, yes, of course, most of the Portuguese winemakers and wine producers, I would say, but majority are fluent in English at least, so they can be themselves and present themselves in the US or in other markets and explain the whys and the hows. And that will eventually stay in somebody's head and said, okay, this is the wine from that guy. And that helps. Oh, I believe that helps. And so it's to give you a face for the product that you're trying to sell or that you are trying to sell via your importer or via your distributor.